of dancing. How do you know new steps in a dance? How do you know the demands of a dance? How do you know what the dancer knows? And how do you teach it? The learning progressions is not about dancing, but in a similar way we can ask the same questions when we're talking about teaching a course. And the questions are, how do you know what the literacy and numeracy demands of the course are that you teach? How do you know what your students' literacy and numeracy abilities are? And how then do you teach embedded literacy and numeracy in your course at the same time? Or in a similar way, it can be shown diagrammatically. And this triangle you may have seen is know the learner, know the demands, and know what to do. And they refer directly to those questions that I just posed. How do you know the demands of your course? How do you know where the learner's ability is? And how do you know what to do? So this triangle is absolutely fundamental to the learning progressions. It underpins the learning progressions framework. And we keep coming back to these three aspects of knowing the demands of the course, knowing the learner's ability, and then knowing what to do. So in this webinar, we're going to be looking at exactly what are the learning progressions, and after going through that pretty rapidly, we're then going to look at how they are used. So if you have questions, please put them in the little chat box on the side, and I'm going to stop at relevant times during this presentation to answer those questions of yours. So first of all, let's have a look at what are the learning progressions. What do they look like? There are a suite of 10 books. There's an introduction to the numeracy learning progressions and 3 numeracy resource books. There is an introduction to the literacy progressions and then 3 literacy resource books. There is a background to the learning progressions book, and there is another one called Starting Points, which is for learners at the pre-reading and writing learning progressions. They can be all found and downloaded and ordered at that particular website there, which is the National Centre of Literacy and Numeracy for Adults website, and it's under the tab of Learning Progression. For the example of today, to introduce the learning progressions, I'm going to be taking this resource book called Teaching Adults to Read with Understanding, and this is the resource book connected to the learning progressions, the introduction for adult literacy. So when we look at the introduction to the learning progressions for literacy, we see in this book a number of charts at the back of the book, and each chart is called a strand. So here I have just depicted a family. I'm calling it the learning progression family, and down the left-hand side you see there is the strand, and this in literacy relates to listen with understanding and speak to communicate. Both of these progressions are in one resource book, but they have their own separate strands. The strand we're looking at today is Read with Understanding in the red, and the right to communicate is the 4th strand within the literacy learning progressions. Within each strand, we have the actual progressions, and if you go down there from the Read with Understanding, you will see that there are 5 progressions, beginning with decoding, then vocabulary, language and text features, comprehension, and reading critically. And within each of those progressions, there are the steps. So within each progression, we have steps from 1 to 6, 1 being at the entry level, 6 being at the most competent. And for each of the learning progressions, it is the same structure, going from 3 to 5 progressions for each strand chart. So again, there are 3 strands for the numeracy, and there are 4 strands for the literacy, but the speak and the listening are within one book for the literacy progressions. family can also be seen as the strand, and you'll find this in the introduction to the literacy progressions. This is the Read with Understanding strand. So the strand is the Read with Understanding. The progressions across the top, you can see it in decoding, vocabulary, language and text features, etc. And then we have the steps as they start from 1 going to 6 down the left-hand side. So what are these learning progressions? Progressions are a framework for guiding the teaching and learning of literacy and numeracy. They are not a curriculum, but they are really the roadmap or the signposts for how adults progress in literacy and numeracy. They go from entry level to competency, and that is, as I mentioned, the steps 1 to step 6. And they have been developed to support the learning of foundation level learners at the National Qualifications Framework levels 1 to 3. So at this point, I'll just take a pause and ask if there are any questions. And at this stage, I do not see any questions coming up. But if you do have a question, please just type it into the side. So let's keep going to the next one. And now that we know the structure of the learning progressions, we're going to go through a very swift process of looking at how the learning progressions can be used. And again, we're going to go with the example of teaching adults to read with understanding. So when we begin teaching a course, how do we know, for example, what the reading demands of a course is? What is your process for finding that out? This is where the learning progressions come in. And from using a template from the learning progressions or from each of the resource books, we can, what we say is map the text against the progressions, or in other words, analyze the text from the progressions. So we need to become familiar with the progressions and each step, and then go through a process of mapping that onto a sample of the course. It could be a text, our own text, it could be an extract from a resource book. So in each case we can go through and we can decide what the demands of that text might be. For example, this is the template that you can find in the Teach Reading with Understanding book, at the end of the book, page 116. And this shows us that there are 6 steps for decoding, 6 steps for each of them, but some of the steps are bigger, and that is just to show that those particular steps have been combined because there is so much work in that, and that they have been put together. So when we map a particular piece of work, and I have done that, I have taken those learning progressions and I have looked at the text and I have mapped it, and I have said yes, decoding is at 4, vocabulary is 5, language and text 4, comprehension 5, and reading critically is at 4 or 3-4. That shows me very clearly what those demands are. So what knowing the demands involves is the dual learning outcomes, because of course we have the vocational outcomes, but we also now have literacy and numeracy demands, literacy and numeracy outcomes. So to find out what those literacy and numeracy outcomes are, we need to do the mapping exercise, and that's just what we've done. And I'll pause again now just to check to see if there are any questions, and I can't see any questions popping up. No, still no questions. So we're going pretty well then. Oh no, I've got one here. Do the progressions correspond at all to year levels at school? The progressions here have been developed for adult learners. I think that's important first of all. For foundation learners, levels 1 to 3. So the compulsory set there has their own progressions, and it would be useful going to the Ministry of Education website to find out what those look like. adults learn in a slightly different way to children because of adults bringing in so much of their own experience and prior knowledge. So let's keep moving on. The next question then is, now that we know how to determine the demands or identify the demands of the course, we now need to know, what about the learner? How do we know what the learner knows? How do we know what the learner's abilities are with reading, for example? So again, we need to do some sort of assessment, and knowing the learner requires an assessment. This is a learner report from the national, from the Literacy and Numeracy for Adults assessment tool, and it's a reading assessment. It doesn't have to be the assessment tool, but most of the sector now is required to use it, so I thought I'd use this as an example. But it could be another assessment. The assessment, however, would have to already have been mapped against the learning progressions. Otherwise, it's difficult to do the next part. So the great thing about the assessment tool is that it's been based on the learning progression. So down the side, we can see those little kuru and piko, and they actually start the other way round, so that there's one at the bottom and 6 at the top. This is opposite to how they come across in the learning progression. But just briefly looking at that, for those of you who are not familiar with the learner report, the black marks indicate correct answers, the white indicates incorrect answers. And this learner has been mapped here across both progressions. You can see them, they've been put together. Vocabulary, language and text features is one, comprehension is another, and reading critically is another. And that this learner has now been mapped at step 3 of the Read with Understanding progression. So what do we do with this information? We can then map the learner onto the template that we have already done for mapping the course demands. So as you know from before, the course demands are the ones showing in red. And now we have mapped the learner at step 3 in the blue, and that sits over the top of it. So what does this tell us? This shows us very clearly that there is a gap here in the decoding by one step, in the vocabulary, in the comprehension, and in the reading critically. It's only in the language and text that the learner is the same as what is required for the demands. Where these gaps stand out, where these red gaps stand out, mean that this is the difference between the demands of the course and where the learner is at. And so we need to be meeting the demands of the course, and we need to be upskilling the learner to meet those demands of the course. So we come back to the learning progressions framework, back to this triangle of know the demands, know the learner, know what to do. We have mapped the course, and now we know the demands. We have assessed the learner, and now we know the learner. And when we have these two pieces of information, we can then go to the third aspect of the framework of know what to do, which is very helpful. So knowing what to do. In the Reading with Understanding book, on pages 26, I think it's in 27, there is a table here of activities, and they have been marked against the learning progressions across the top. So again, we have the reading progressions at the top. We have activities coming down the left-hand side. And if you turn to your Reading with Understanding, you'll see that there. It is very clear then that we can select particular activities which will help to complement the teaching strategies, the instructional strategies, to meet the learning outcomes that we have created or that we have developed for this particular piece of learning. The instructional strategies are on page 25, I think, and most the instructional strategies are in each of the resource books. So with the learning outcomes, they identify the instructional strategies and choosing the particular areas that we need to focus on to make sure that we can support the learner, strengthen the learner's reading skills to meet those demands. We then, of course, go to the next step and develop a lesson plan. But that, of course, is something, a next stage and probably requires another webinar. So in summary, these learning progressions, using the framework, using the resource books, using the templates, and using assessments, and specifically the assessment tool, can help make my teaching more effective. And we go back to that triangle, which is knowing the demands of the course, knowing the abilities of my learners, and then knowing what to do. Finally, in terms of a specific quotation, again from the website of Literacy and Numeracy for Adults, again on the same page about the, under all the learning progressions, you can find more information there. And that is the input that I wish to give, so please feel free now to write any of your questions. I'm just looking at one now. I'm not sure about your, did you say that the progression rate? That's right. The learning progressions have been developed to support the learning of adult learners in the National Qualifications Framework of levels 1 to 3, which are considered as foundation learners. Are there any other questions? No, well, I think that we've done that very swiftly, but it will be there on the it will be up on the website for you to go back and have a look at that information. It is very useful to use this to, especially for new tutors or management who have no understanding of the learning progressions. This helps your work getting to the next point. If you're doing in-house professional development, it certainly will help us as we come around doing professional development work with you. It's very useful for people to know and to have looked at and to be familiar with that set of books, that the suite of 10 books that go with the learning progressions. So I have here, so what a person may be achieving at K6 to tackle tertiary courses. Sorry, what is K6? No, thank you very much, Anne. The steps are not aligned. The steps are not aligned with the NQF levels. But again, if you go into the website, you will see that there is, if you search for alignment, you will see a rough guide, but you need to be very flexible about that rough guide about where the different systems sit. So no, definitely not. Really, within the learning progressions, we think about step 5, step 6, step 5 and 6 of the learning progressions has been ready for someone to go into a level 4 further level 4 NQF course. Level 6. So back to Kira's question. people are already enrolled, Karen, at tertiary institutions, and some of them come in at quite low levels, and this is exactly where these people, this is how we can support the embedded literacy and numeracy work that we've been doing. And so they do not need to be at 6 to go to tertiary study, but they need to certainly be on their journey. Some of them are low at 2s and 3s. Some of them are at 5s and 6, and they are different. Remembering that the learners have psyche profiles. And from Anne, where do you get extra copies? Do they cost? No, the copies. Again, if you go to the website, as it's up here at the moment, you can order copies online. And if there are no more questions, that we'll leave it there. But feel free to contact me if you wish. If you have more questions, my email is here. Waikato should be one word, just looking at it.